What's up, everybody? This is going to be a little different than most of the videos on this channel, as it's not going to be an informative video. Today I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of the concerns that the player base has been having with the direction of the game, the content that the game currently has, and ultimately what I would both like to see, as well as what I think the game needs in order to have a successful future. Starting off, I'm going to mention what I'm not going to talk about, which is monetization practices by Plarium. That's an entirely different issue that many people have strong opinions about, and there's just no way to lightly touch on it in this video without derailing the whole thing. What I am going to talk about is content, what we have and what we need. First, let's talk about what we have and the problems with it. We currently actually have a decent amount of content for a young game like Raid. It's important to remember when comparing Raid with its competitors that Raid is actually a very young game. That said, I feel like there are definitely some issues with the current development direction. The main problem I have is with gameplay. It's that everything is static, and there's elements of artificial difficulty. I'll get into that more shortly. Let's address the issue of static gameplay in ways that could be improved upon. The problem is that almost all of the gameplay in the game never changes. Campaign is obviously a joke in the late game, but that's fine, you could consider it an early game feature. However, dungeons are clearly designed to be late game content, yet they literally never change as you go into the later stages of the dungeons. Instead, what you have are effectively gear checks as opposed to an increase in strategic difficulty. Instead of bringing in varying mechanics that players would need to employ different strategies for, we just get more damage and more HP on the bosses and the minions in the dungeons. This forces players to simply grind gear and champions and makes them rely on pure RNG as opposed to strategy. This is effectively artificial difficulty to try and simulate a difficult endgame. This issue is actually a hard one to address because PvE content almost always has to stay static in order for players to be able to achieve a level of consistency in clearing it. However, I have hopes that Faction Wars, if it ever comes out, will be somewhat of a solution to this, requiring players to rely on putting together strategic teams from different factions. Let's move on to an area of the game that is more lacking, that is PvP. PvP in this game is abysmal, and that's the main area I think the development really needs to improve upon. PvP is currently static as well. You make an arena team, then you just grind out fights against AI-controlled opponents, doing the same thing every fight. It's not even really PvP, to be honest. It's not player versus player. It's just player versus AI using a team that some other player designed. What I would really like to see is live PvP. This could be achieved via daily PvP tournaments that players would queue for. You would be matched against an opponent and engage in live PvP, adding a dynamic element to the fights. Skill and strategy could be further increased in these fights by making the fights a best out of 3 and allowing use of items during the fight, and allowing teams to be switched up between rounds. This would encourage players to foster a more diverse PvP champion pool in order to have a larger pool to get champions from in order to counter their opponents. Besides that, I would really like to see clan PvP. I want to be able to do practice fights against my clanmates. I want to have wars between clans where one clan attacks another and has to defeat their members in PvP. All of this PvP content is very valuable to a game like Raid because this provides dynamic gameplay without the need to actually design complex mechanics into the game. The developers don't have to spend tons of time making complex bosses. The players themselves will provide dynamic gameplay. Players will constantly be playing differently versus each other, keeping it fresh and entertaining. This is a very development efficient type of content that only requires a framework and balancing to be implemented. Besides dynamic PvP, I want to see more clan content, preferably dynamic clan content. It would be great to have a random boss pulled from a pool of 3 or 4 bosses that the clan would need to fight each day. Combine that with a random modifier pulled from a pool of around 10 modifiers, and you have a very large amount of combinations for different boss fights. These would require different teams and strategies to overcome. I don't want this video to go too long, and honestly I could ramble on and on about possible content, but ultimately it comes down to one thing. The game needs dynamic content, that is, content that changes. There's only so many times the veteran players can autopilot the same mindless fights over and over, never changing their teams, before they get bored and quit. Veteran player retention is very important for a game's longevity, and ultimately there's very little content currently to keep in-game players. That's it for this video. Hopefully in the near future we can see some dynamic content. In the meantime, keep grinding boys, and I'll catch you all in the next video.